The workplace is not a natural environment. It's socially constructed. Just take the fact that we sign a formal contract to start working. So the relationship between people here is based on a contract between employer and employee. Studying leadership or followership in these environments is tricky because trying to understand how people behave in an environment that's not natural. So I've been interested in
Meet Chris Monö. He is the Natural Followership Advisor, speaker, trainer, consultant, and the Organisational Development Manager at a large Scandinavian financial services company. Author of Why We Follow, Chris has spent nearly 2 decades helping organizations rethink leadership. Honored with the 2024 Global Followership Award of Distinction.
Quiet quitting is an example where employees remain in their jobs. They do what they're supposed to do, but they don't go beyond their responsibilities. Collaborationship, which is the process where people build synergies by using each other's skills to maximize their chances of reaching a particular goal.
What do you see as the barrier? Is it fear to a large extent? Is that what's stopping people opening up their collaborative approach more broadly within an organization? Because they think they have to do it in the hierarchical kind of way, and if they don't do that, then...
Very good question.
Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Power Between podcast.
Thank you, Roddy. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show today, Chris. We've known each other for a few years now, primarily through our mutual interest in followership, which I like to describe as being the sort of the flip side of the leadership coin. You can't have one without the other, and we tend to over-focus on leadership and under-focus on followership. But you particularly, but we both have an interest in followership, and you have your wonderful insights into natural followership, which I'm sure we will touch on later today, and how that connects with the Making Organization More Human strapline that we have with our Developing Leaders Quarterly journal, which, not coincidentally perhaps, you wrote an excellent piece for in our followership issue just over a year ago. You're also a practicing OD, Organisational Development Manager in Sweden, and so I have daily exposure to the world of mid-level leaders. And I wondered if, just before we sort of get into the further conversation, you might like to share a little bit about your current role and how you see mid-level leaders being sort of impacted in that organisation.
It's a very broad question, how mid-level managers are impacted. But yeah, I work with organizational development, and I have for many, many years in various forms. So I've always been interested in that part of business. How do you develop an organization? And a lot of it is about people. It's organizations are built by people. So that's where my interest lies. And working, at least from my point of view, working in this area is very, very broad. So it's about, listening to what's happening within the organization and supporting people in various levels. Middle managers in particular are in a challenging position. Usually I would say it's one of the toughest positions to be in my opinion.
I think that's right. Yeah. I mean, I think we see that it's sort of in between the two sort of outward facing parts of the organization, perhaps, the front line of dealing with customers and the senior leadership. And you're there trying to manage the different flows that occur in between. I mean, from an OD perspective, how much focus is there on that tension there in the middle, and how much is more sort of seen as more strategic thinking?
I think it depends on what organization you're in. It has been very different for me depending on what organization I'm in. So if I'm in a sort of startup or a scale up situation like the one I'm in now, a lot of my work is focused on processes and efficiency work, and that usually boils down to how do we collaborate, how do we work together, and so it's more focused on that. But in larger organizations, a lot of the challenge where you have these processes in place, a lot of the challenges often lie in teamworks and breaking silos, and that's where middle managers often play a very central role. And they tend to get sort of caught in between a rock and a hard place where they they have to focus on their team, but at the same time get that team to work with other teams, and they're measured on how they perform in their own team and not how they work with the other team. So there are these conflicting structural aspects that is challenging for them.
I noticed when I was just sort of going over some of the emails that we've exchanged recently that underneath your signature on your emails, you have a couple of lines that says redefining leadership, rethinking followership, and unlocking the power of collaborationship. And I love that word, collaborationship. And you just sort of touched on it there. I think it's a sort of that's a perfect sort of triplet perhaps for us, as the shift in organizational complexity means collaborationship is what we need to strive for. And I think we see that time and again. That's where organizational inefficiencies tend to come in, is because of poor collaboration. What are you specifically seeing that we can do to improve that?
Okay, well, so here is where the fact that I've been working with organizational development in various forms for a long time, but I've also then, like you mentioned in the beginning, been really interested in natural leadership and followership. And what's really interesting, and I think it's one of the things that most people and I would say even experts within leadership and followership don't discuss, and definitely not discuss within organizational development, in my opinion, is the fact that the workplace is not a natural environment. It's socially constructed. And just take the fact that we sign a formal contract to start working. So the relationship between people here is based on a contract between employer and employee. And this contract, and I mean, it says not only what you're going to earn. It says, who you'll be reporting to, what you'll be doing, the vacation, how many weeks of vacation you have, etc. And all of these are factors that impact how people interact. And so studying leadership or followership in these environments is tricky, because it's trying to understand how people behave in an environment that's not natural. So I've been interested in how people lead and follow in environments that are natural. Like among friends, for example, how does that work? We don't have a dedicated manager to manage a group of friends. We solve that anyway, and how does that work? So here's the problem, the way I see it. Because we have socially constructed environments where we set up rules and often hierarchies dictating who will do what and how we're going to coordinate people, the way that we set up that structure is very, very important. If we set it up in the wrong way, we actually work against human nature and human collaboration. And just that dynamic between having a manager who has the power to make decisions, and then you have subordinates who are formally on a piece of paper, I've been told that, you report to this person. That relationship is based on power, which is not natural. And I think, especially for middle managers, this becomes really tricky, because they're in a position where they can influence the formal structure a lot. So they're limited in what they can do in terms of changing the structure and organization, etc. And at the same time, they're expected to engage people and get people involved and collaborate, etc. And that's a very, very difficult position to be in. So I think that that's one of the key challenges for us at the moment, learning how to break down these formal structures and rebuild them in a way that's more, that fits human nature in a better way.
Yeah, I mean, and I love that analogy that you've used around natural ways of working without that constructed contract structure around us. And you say, if there are a group of friends organizing to go out of an evening, we don't select a leader to do that. The right person or a person with the capacity to do it emerges at the right time, and it won't necessarily be the same person each time. So that fluidity is really interesting, which we of course don't have in an organizational setting.
No, it's very hard to. It's there. It's natural. So we know how to do that, but it's so interesting because you mentioned quiet quitting is an example where employees remain in their jobs and they do what they're supposed to do, but they don't go beyond their responsibilities. And this is really interesting because from a management perspective, that's very hard to tackle because they're doing what they're supposed to do, but they don't bring that, passion into it. And usually there's nothing in that contract that says, you're going to be working and you're going to be very passionate about what you do. We just hope that they are. And so this is very hard to tackle because people are not doing anything wrong, but they don't have that passion. And that just proves how important that engagement is and that passion is within an organization. And people have a natural tendency to collaborate. And like I said, this collaborationship, which is the process where people build synergies by using each other's skills to maximize their chances of reaching a particular goal. So if you and I want to do something, we have a goal, and then we make use of each other's differences. So whenever you're good at something and I'm not, then it makes sense for me to follow you, and vice versa. So we have that in us. And if you ask people, okay, so you have this kind of problem at work, who do you turn to? Oh, well, I'll turn to John. Okay, what about this problem? Oh, that's Sarah. I'll go to Sarah. Okay. So you don't go to your manager. No. I only go to my manager with these kind of questions. So people naturally do this. The only problem we have is that when we build that structure in an typical organization, we say that the manager has the decision-making rights over the group. And so when we face difficult questions that might need that interaction and discussions, etc., the manager is the one who's expected to make the decisions. And how they interact with their employees is one factor, but the structure in itself becomes problematic. And what I've seen is that just to make things more complicated for the poor manager is the fact that we are sort of brainwashed into accepting this structure. It starts from when we were kids. If you have a problem in school, you go to the teacher, and then continues, and then you get employed. And if you have a problem, you go to the manager. So even if you as a manager open up the possibility for that more natural leadership and followership to take place, a lot of employees are very uncomfortable in that situation because they're not trained to collaborate in that way. So they can do it perfectly outside the workplace, but as soon as they enter the doors and enter the building, they take on that subordinate role, and that changes the way they collaborate. And building passion in such an environment is difficult. It's very, very difficult.
What do you see then as the barrier? I mean, it's fear to a large extent? Is that what's stopping people opening up their collaborative approach more broadly within an organization because they think they have to do it in the hierarchical kind of way, and if they don't do that, then they might get.
Very good question. I wouldn't say that it's fear. I think it's more routine, maybe. I've met
Embedded.
people and I met people, and I've been in meetings where I've said, okay, look, so we have this problem and it impacts you. So how would you like to solve it? And I've been receiving responses like, well, you're the manager. That's your job to solve it. I'm not paid to do that. So that is also a problem, the expectations we have. But I think we need to change that. If we want to change the workplace, we need to change our mentality of what we're expected. I believe that every single employee in a company have some sort of strategic responsibility for ensuring that the company or the workplace moves in the direction we're supposed to move in. Just stripped people of that responsibility, and we've placed it on management. And then we've told managers that you need to be leaders, which means you need to influence people in a way that they get engaged and motivated. And that's a lot of responsibility on one person to handle.
My expectation is this is a theme that will keep coming through in these conversations. But in order to increase performance, increase productivity, you need to have an engaged workforce, and people need to be energized about being at work. And that comes through having clear sight of what your purpose at work is, and that you're getting some meaning out of it. And those are very primal sort of human drivers, motivators. So if you're seeing, and I think you're absolutely right, that that in organizations that we don't have that opportunity to take on agency, to give ourselves some purpose and meaning, either because the big goal is not being presented clearly to us, or because we feel very boxed in by the sort of tight remit of our job contract requirements. Then how do we break that cycle? I suppose that's really what the power between is all about, is trying to find where we get the power in the middle of organizations to break out of this cycle. Have you got a very neat answer to that? And then we can just stop it here.
I wish I did. But I think a very good place to start is to look at what are we doing in our organization today that hinders collaboration? Because every single organization, every single workplace have something, they're doing something that prevents collaboration from taking place. It's just a matter of figuring out what it is. So a very good place to start there. And the second thing, I believe, is to be quite honest with what's happening here. People are getting paid to do a job, and we're behaving as though people are there because they choose to, in terms of loving what they do. They're passionate about a brand, the brand they work for, etc. And that's fantastic, because some people have that passion, but not everyone. And so we just have to be honest that not everyone will have that passion. And how do we deal with that, So these are questions, and they're very hard to answer. But I think we have to be honest about the situation and then work from there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's really clear. And I think that's a fundamentally important point, is recognizing the work being done is not necessarily the primary driver of that worker's life. There are going to be lots of people who are literally working so they can do something else, whether that is, just keep a roof over your head and feed your family, or it's your passion for whatever it may be, buying expensive
playing golf in Spain,
or playing golf in Spain, or whatever it is. But doing the work may just be the means to the end. But within that, there is a need, if you want your organization to flourish and to thrive, that people don't come in just thinking about how soon they're going to be able to leave. So we do need to be able to increase that engagement. And it seems to me that, the basic way to do that is to make people think that they're making a difference. If you can see that you're making a difference and that it's impactful and productive, then that makes it a more rewarding thing to do, intrinsically as well as extrinsically.
Absolutely. But there's a factor here that we mustn't forget, and that is, you work for me. You're doing something that's very, very important. I've shown it to you. You've seen the results, the effects of what you do. It impacts a lot of people. You're very proud of what you do. But you also feel that I'm controlling you in various ways, that your freedom is limited at work. And that feeling is probably a lot stronger than the importance of doing something valuable. Because as soon as you feel that you're controlled, what happens is you need to sort of protect yourself. This is just human nature. The less freedom you have, the more you'll probably resist. You'll have that sense of, how do I protect myself from this? And so in order to have that focus on, and I completely agree with you, knowing what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that's key. And if we look at our ancestors and how they collaborated, everything is built on, or was built on, achieving a goal, a mutually important goal of some sort. So I completely agree with you with that. But here, this is sort of my point, that the structural aspects that we build around this becomes very important. Because if you have a structure that's very hierarchical, with managers who are controlling their staffs or signaling control or dominance over their staff, that creates, or can create, a sense of, limited freedom. Psychological reactance is the term here, that you feel that your freedom is limited and you will try to react to protect it. And so that's my point. We can talk about the importance of visions and values and goals, setting up, engaging people and making them feel that they're doing something really important. But if you don't have the structure that supports it, it becomes very, very hard.
And have you seen examples of where that sense of control is diluted to a significant extent so that people don't feel that they're being controlled.
Absolutely. And
Yes. I mean, what's the ideal that we're working towards within a practical fashion?
well, I think that no, that's a very good question. I think it very much depends on the situation. That's why it's hard to
No, of
answer your
course it
question
does.
because it depends on where I've been and what kind of
Context.
situation I've seen. But to give you a simple example, a manager who positioned themselves and sort of communicates that I'm part of the team. These are my tasks. I represent you in meetings with the group. I deal with the administrative aspects. I help you gather information. I help you connect with the right people in the organization. But then we make decisions together. That's, for an example, is just it's a signal that we're doing this together. Another very, very good example of a good friend of mine, she did this beautifully. She came into an organization and she had a team, and the first thing she sort of asked them was, "So what's our purpose in this organization? Why are we here?" And the answer was more or less, "Okay, we do A, we do B, and we do C." Yeah, 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 but how do we support the organization? And then she got everyone on board on why they were important. And then they had conversations together where they identified, what do we need to improve? What do we need to do? What changes do you like or would you want in order to reach our objectives? And then the team was engaged in setting those up. And then she was like, okay, so we are responsible for making sure that this happens. And then they started sort of dividing up tasks and being responsible for different things. And they would sort of follow it up together. So my point here is, she took a role where she created that atmosphere of people leading and following each other in order to reach that mutual goal. And she managed to do that in a middle management position and did it really, really well.
And it lasted, it endured, did it? I mean, because that's obviously the hope that we can do that on a continuous basis, and you build that energy in the group from that.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is, they became the best, if I remember correctly, they became the best performing team within that company. And then she left and they got another manager. And within, I think, a month or two, they were back to the same performance as before. And she ended up becoming CEO of a company. So,
So
so it worked for her team and it worked for her. And the only thing she did, and this is the interesting part, is she never tried to go in and lead them. She just tried to create an environment where they could lead and where, they could take turns leading and, this leader rotation that you and I have discussed before and collaborationship, etc.
which is, yeah, I mean, that fits beautifully with the definition I use for leadership, which is someone who creates the conditions for others to do their best work. And so she's a condition creator. That's what she was doing, was creating the environment, the rules, the structure around that it could work in. And it's very similar to the story of David Marquez, yes,
Yeah,
Marquez,
yeah.
in the US submarine captain who turned the ship around. And we should see if we get David to come and join one of these conversations, because he's
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah. No, no, absolutely. And but here's another funny thing. If you would ask her, she wouldn't say that she's the leader. She would say, I'm the manager for that team. I created just that environment for others to lead and follow in that environment. And like I said, that's one way of sort of breaking down the barriers.
but it takes a certain humility to do that, doesn't it? Because I mean, often we think when we're put into a leading role, we have to lead carrying the flag from the front in a sort of very obvious position.
Yeah, we have
And that
to.
is almost the definition of what's going to deflate the people behind, sort of draw.
That's true, and you and I have discussed this before as well. That we have to be careful with how we sort of talk about leaders and leadership. If we make leaders the focal point, if we argue that leadership is the key to our problems, then that automatically indicates that anyone who's not a leader is not as important, and followership is not important for success, and that undermines everything that leadership is supposed to, because in the end, leadership, really, it's a tool. The reason we teach people leadership at work is not because leadership in itself will provide anything. It's the idea that leadership will get other people to perform or get engaged or motivated. So my suggestion is focus less on the leadership aspect and start focusing immediately on those aspects that get people, engagement, collaboration, motivation, and be honest with what kind of challenge do you have at work. Why are people here for real? What could change their mentality? What's important to talk to them?
Absolutely. And those are conversations that it often is difficult to find the right space in organizations to talk about, I think, isn't it? So I mean, if you are in a role where you can do that, you have to be pretty proactive to go out there and start it. And
Takes
as
guts.
you were saying, you don't need to be a senior leader or even really a leader about it, I suspect. And that's where the interesting followership part comes in, doesn't it? So anyone at any level can begin these conversations. Their influence might be, lesser if they don't have a position of some degree of power. So if you're right at the bottom of the hierarchy, then that gets more limiting, but it can still be done.
If you look at people who make a career really fast, often they have this attitude of, we need to solve this together. Let's fix this. I'll help out. I'll do this. I can do that. So they have that within them already. And the funny thing is, other managers will look at that and say, oh, that behavior is interesting, or that person is doing a really good job. We like that attitude, and we put them in management positions, So, but we should get everyone to do this. It's possible to get everyone to do, well, at least most people to do it, because they managed to do it outside work. So they should be able to do it inside work. It's not the people who's the problem. It's the structures we build that's the problem.
Well, it's the mental structures as well, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's the ones we bring with us, thinking this
Absolutely.
is how it works. You mentioned the quiet quitting piece of research, which we were talking about before. I was just recently come out by, and we'll put the link in the show notes, but just to summarizing, it says employers should consider strategies that implement frequent feedback, managerial support, information sharing, and signs of appreciation, which it calls enhancing participative management. And that's really what we're talking about here, isn't it? It's that sharing out of, this is the problem, and not holding stuff back too much. And that there will be occasions where that's problematic, perhaps, if there's sensitive information, but I would have thought in 90% of times it's pretty easy to do that, and it draws people in thinking that that they're part of the team, and that they understand better what the issue is, and therefore they're part of the team that's required to resolve it. Is that something you've seen sort of being done well?
Yeah, I had lunch yesterday with the CEO of a company. He just started there, and we've had numerous discussions over the years, and he did this. So what he did was, one of the first things he started was he made information available to everyone. And he went out and he said, if you want information, it's there, you can find it. And he got like two different types of reactions. So sort of half of the employees, like half group of employees were really happy about it. And the other half went like, okay, so there's a problem here. If we have an issue with finance here, does that mean that I might lose my job? And they start thinking, how will this impact me, etc. And the CEO was questioned. He was like, what will happen if people start quitting because they feel like, they get the real numbers? And his argument is, it should be the opposite, because I'm showing them what reality looks like. And if we have people who don't want to, have this fight with us or take on this battle with us, then maybe they shouldn't be here. So I want people who look at this as a challenge and go, okay, so let's fix this. Let's get this done. So yeah, people may react differently to it, but you also have to ask yourself, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's sorts.
Who do you want on board for this?
Exactly. So yeah, it can be challenging, but this is, again, the more information you have, the more information the employee can use when making their own decisions. And in the end, they have the right to make a decision that impacts their lives. So
I mean, you're based in Stockholm in Sweden. We're always being shown tables about how happy and successful and wonderful all the Scandinavian countries are, and to a large extent they're true. But I suspect there are moments in between. And Norway, I think, famously has that you can look up how much tax people pay or what people earn or something like that, isn't it? They're terribly transparent about it. So
yeah,
I just wonder if there's in Scandinavia, if you're already further down the road with that in being sort of dealing with the reality. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, and I'm not comfortable saying that this is the way it is. But I believe that what we can say is that it's definitely, culture definitely impacts our view on how we should organize and the view on hierarchy and what information should be shared, etc. So, but we have some interesting companies who push this even further. Spotify is one of them. Netlight is another one where you don't have any managers. You just have sort of a management group, and then everyone else is working in teams. So I don't know if it's typical Scandinavian to create these environments. I believe you can find them in a lot of places.
You can definitely find them elsewhere too. Yeah. But just wondering if there was a broader cultural sort of approach with that. I mean, sorry. I mean, you're quite sort of sorry. Go on.
No. I think that what we do have, which is some at least can be a cultural issue in some working relations, is that at least we Swedes tend to go, okay, so we need a decision on this, and everyone sort of gather around and we need to talk about this. And then people who come from very hierarchical cultures find this extremely frustrating, because in their view it should be very easy to say we're going to do this and people just do it, while we have a tendency to say, okay, we should do this, right? And then we have this conversation, and the conversation can take time. And we're definitely not perfect in this area. We can improve. But I think that mentality is kind of important, because if you get people engaged in discussing and coming to a solution, by the time you have a solution, implementing it will go a lot faster than if you have someone saying, we're going to do this, and people will do it, but they may not like it. And so that's where you find the quiet quitting taking place. Okay, I'll do just what he tells me to do, but I won't do anything else. Because they're not engaged they haven't been part of the decision-making process.
But it's interesting that you say, that culture is strong in Sweden. I mean, at its very loosest way of looking at it, but the collective versus individualistic cultures is that it tends to be more Northern European and North American that are more individualistic and less collective. But that's a very collective way of dealing with issues and problems. And when the issue or problem is complex, I think you need to have a more collective way of responding to it.
But it's actually, it doesn't have to be two opposites, because if you think about it, if we're very individualistic, when it comes to making a decision, I feel that I have the right to be part of it. Even if I'm not in a management position, I have a right to be part of it because it affects my life. So being individualistic in that perspective actually creates that collective mindset. And I think that is in itself, and if you look at these band societies that they used to be the major part of our existence, we lived in these small societies, they had that sort of same behavior. Each individual was free to make their own decisions, and that in itself created that requirement for a collaborative engagement. While if you have a very hierarchical or if you're in a non-individualistic culture, then the hierarchical structure will work, because you're just supposed to sort of follow the crowd.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight, which I had failed to grasp before. So I think that's brilliant, brilliant, and that fits with the followership. We're about out of time, but I just want to perhaps end on followership and point out the book Why We Follow over your shoulder too, which you published earlier this year. There we go, that one. Yeah, that is perhaps at essence what we're saying about followership is that it gives everyone the opportunity to be involved with the decision, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they get the right to make the decision.
Absolutely. Fellowship isn't about agreeing on everything. It's just being part of making decisions. And we started off talking about the problems of having a structure where people are sort of squared into boxes and then obedience and expected to be obedient and obey their managers, etc. And yet they won't really live in. So you get that sort of struggle between employer and employee, and that can be a hassle, and then between different groups, etc. But if you sort of scale that down and stop focusing too much on leadership or followership and focus on why are we here? What do we do together? How do we collaborate better? What are we doing today that hinders collaboration? These kind of discussions are very important to move an organization forward. And you can do that in a team, and you can do that on a whole organizational, from a whole organizational perspective.
Are you optimistic that the organizations are shifting in the right direction?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that if you look at it historically, you'll see that we were very free for like 90% of our existence. We've lived in these natural collaborative environments. And then we started organizing ourselves into larger groups, and that required coordination. And we haven't really figured out how to get people to coordinate properly. So we've tried hierarchies, and we've been experimenting for many, many years, like 12,000 years, 20,000 years. And we continue to do that. So we have these organizations that don't have any managers. That's sort of an experiment that we're trying out, and we're sort of pushing in that direction where people get more involved, and it will go up and it will go down. We will have periods where we are less inclined to have that more democratic approach at work, but I'm definitely positive that we're moving in the right direction.
Fantastic. That's what we're aiming for. And the right direction isn't just so that everyone feels better about themselves. It also means that there are more productive outcomes too.
Absolutely.
And that organizations work more effectively. So Chris Monö, thank you very much indeed. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.